Welcome to Eat Well 1, which is called Energy and Digestion. Before we jump into this topic, the Eat Well series primarily focuses on nutrition and how we can improve our relationship with food, but ultimately understand how food is digested, processed, and metabolized. So the first topic of conversation is energy. What is it? Where does it come from? And how can we utilize it? Now, dietary energy is actually derived from the consumption of food and beverages. And it's the fuel that powers our bodies. Much like our mobile phones needs that battery or that juice that we get from the plug socket. Now, energy is measured in calories. This energy is primarily sourced from carbohydrates, fats, and proteins found within our diet. And the body can actually utilize these calories for essential functions like regulating your body temperature, muscular contraction, and also supporting cognitive activities such as listening to my voice and absorbing what's on today's training. Now, the individual energy requirement can vary based on factors such as age, sex, your weight, current physical activity levels, and it really does highlight the personalized nature of nutritional needs. And we can see in the diagram on the right-hand side, any food or drink that we consume is converted into energy, which our body can use and almost recharge our battery lives. So going into it a little bit more deeply, energy is actually broken down into a molecule called glucose, and blood glucose, commonly known as blood sugar, is a type of sugar that circulates in your bloodstream and serves as a primary source of energy for your body cells. Much like a car needs diesel or petrol or now electric to be able to go from one location to the other, we actually use glucose to be able to carry out specific activities and bodily functions. It comes from the food and drink that we consume. It's particularly targeting those rich in carbohydrates, and the body regulates blood glucose levels to ensure a steady and balanced supply of energy for various physiological functions. Now, when it comes to fat loss, understanding blood glucose becomes crucial due to its relationship with a hormone called insulin, which is produced by the pancreas. So here's how blood glucose and insulin are linked for fat loss. After you eat, especially when you consume carbohydrate, for example, you might have 2 slices of bread in the morning with your eggs and your avocado. Your blood glucose levels rise. In response, the pancreas produces insulin to help your body cells absorb and utilize glucose for energy. However, insulin also plays a role in storing excess glucose as glycogen in the liver and in the muscle. When these storage sites are full, the remaining glucose is converted into fat for long-term storage. So what we would say there is if we have too much glucose dancing around in our blood, doing a Mexican wave, wearing sombreros, it has to go somewhere. Not all of it is going to go into the body cell, but we can't just wave a magic wand and make it disappear. Abracadabra. It's stored as glycogen in the liver and then the muscle, and then once those storage sites are full, at full capacity, it's then stored as different types of fat, namely subcutaneous fat, which you can see on your abdominal cavity. If you take 2 fingers, you pinch on your stomach, you pull away that skin, there's a little bit of fat. And then visceral fat, which surrounds our organs. Now, fluctuations in blood glucose levels can impact feelings of hunger and satiety. Satiety means feeling full. A rapid spike in blood glucose is often associated with consuming sugary, refined carbohydrates. Cakes, biscuits, chocolates, sweets. We have that initial spike, but then it leads to a subsequent drop in blood sugar levels. This drop may actually trigger feelings of hunger and cravings for more high-calorie, energy-dense foods, particularly hindering fat loss. So to stabilize our blood glucose and to support fat loss, we typically recommend to focus on foods that have a lower impact on blood glucose levels, choosing complex carbohydrates, fiber-rich foods, and incorporating a balanced mix of micro and macronutrients, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates to stabilize our blood glucose levels. This is going to help to control your appetite and energy balance, promoting favorable environment for fat loss. Now, in later sessions, we will look at exercise and blood glucose in Move More. But for now, let's turn our attention to the World Health Organization and their complete definition of what blood glucose is. Blood sugar refers to the amount of glucose in the blood, sometimes known as blood glucose. And we can see that the expected values for normal fasting blood glucose concentration levels are between 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter, or 3.9 millimoles per liter to 5.5 millimoles per liter. Now, when fasting blood glucose is between 100 to 125 milligrams per deciliter, 5.5 to 7 millimoles per liter, changes in lifestyle and monitoring glycemia, so that's just blood glucose, are recommended, according to diabetes.co.uk. Now, previously, I worked as a biomedical scientist, and I also helped type 1 and type 2 diabetics, over 2,000 patients, drop body fat, build muscle, improve their relationship with food, but also stabilize their blood glucose levels, which reduce the risk of any long-term health complications associated with type 2 diabetes mellitus. And here we can actually see the differentiation between normal blood glucose levels, pre-diabetes, and diabetes. Let's just draw our attention to fasting plasma glucose, which we can see in the top. Normal ranges are anything less than 5.5 millimoles per liter. Pre-diabetes is 5.5 to 7 millimoles per liter. So if you land in that range, you are a pre-diabetic. And you have diabetes if it's greater than 7 millimoles per liter. Other things I want you to look at are HbA1c. That's the total amount of glucose in the blood. Now, this accumulation occurs over a few months. It's not instantaneous. So anything less than 42 millimoles per liter, let's say it's 41.9, you're in the safe zone. You have normal physiological levels of glucose in your blood. Pre-diabetes, anywhere between 42 and 47 millimoles per liter. And then you would have diabetes if it's greater than 47. If it's 47.01, you are a diabetic, specifically a type 2 diabetic. So why are we talking about blood glucose, and why is it important to control blood glucose? Well, within the fitness industry, especially with fat loss, this is something that's not taught, and we are taught to stay in a calorie deficit. Now, that's absolutely true to lose weight. A calorie deficit, energy in versus energy out, that will get you to lose weight. But I want us to understand the impact of blood glucose and its effect on fat loss and other physiological changes within our bodies, such as insulin regulation, fat burning and storage, hormone and energy, managing glucose, and then avoiding excess. So in terms of insulin regulation and managing our glucose levels, When we actually consume carbohydrates, they convert into that tiny molecule called glucose, and it prompts the pancreas to produce insulin, which helps to regulate that energy utilization or storage as glycogen in the liver and the muscle, or be stored as fat. Now, by optimizing your glucose levels, insulin function is significantly improved. So, by being in a calorie deficit, you can actually regulate when insulin is produced and how much glucose you can drive from the blood into your body's cells. So, whilst you're on this fat loss journey, yes, we might be looking at one metric, which is your stair weight, but you should also make note of any internal changes and just energy that you feel from the changes made with your nutrition. Now, we're also going to reduce the likelihood of excess fat storage, just because the majority of that glucose is going from the blood into your body cell. We will come on to the different types of transporter barriers that help with that transportation. But in short, stable glucose levels help to play a critical role in maintaining your energy balance, which is important as we start to pull food and actually control our appetite whilst in a calorie deficit. Now, high glucose levels actually inhibit fat burning. So if we've got too much glucose in the blood, then we are insulin resistant. Those cell doors actually close. I want you to think of it as a car park. Those cars, or the glucose molecules, can no longer come into the car park, which is our body cells, so they need to go somewhere else. They'll probably drive around to find other car parking spaces, but in the end, they're stored as subcutaneous or visceral fat, or even glycogen. Now, to manage glucose effectively, it is really important that we look at complex carbohydrates, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, balanced meals with protein, and healthy fats. And we actually limit our intake of added sugars and processed foods to prevent those spikes and make sure that we have sustainable energy across the different phases that you're going to be working through. So, here's a diagram that I created based on going out for a meal, specifically Wagamamas, and then coming home and wanting to break down digestion and what happens and the changes that are made. So when you eat this lovely Wagamamas, okay, you probably have some starchy noodles in there. That's a primary carbohydrate. Your body initiates digestion in the mouth, and we produce an enzyme called amylase. Now, that complex process breaks down the food that you consume into essential nutrients. Amylase is what I call a little worker. It sits in your mouth and also in your stomach with a pickaxe, and it breaks down that carbohydrate that you've consumed from that lovely Wagamamas. Now, starting in the mouth and continuing throughout the digestive tract, so down our esophagus, into our stomach, we now have three areas of the stomach: the fundus, the body, and the pyloric sphincter. These enzymes and acids actually work together because, remember, they are little workers. They are almost best friends, colleagues. And they extract those elements like carbohydrate, protein. An enzyme that breaks down protein is proteases, very original. And then fats will be lipases. This process actually ensures that your body can absorb these nutrients for energy and other bodily functions. And once the stomach has actually mechanically broken down that food into its individual components, carbohydrate, protein, fat, it's then moved towards the small intestine. And that's where absorption takes place. So you have three areas called the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. They almost sound like prehistoric animals. But let's talk about the topic of conversation, which is blood glucose. After digestion, glucose, which is represented as this light blue molecule, is actually transported through a GLUT4 transporter barrier. So I want you to imagine that barrier is here. The car park has opened up. The car can now transport itself from outside the car park into a car parking space, which is the blood. We're now looking at regulating your blood glucose levels. So the pancreas produces insulin, which is represented as this key. And the key opens up the cell doors and tells glucose to travel from the blood into your cells. And that does include your brain. So as glucose has entered into the bloodstream and the pancreas has now produced insulin, that's going to facilitate the uptake of glucose by your cells for energy, readily available, or for storage. Now, the connection between digestion and blood glucose is noteworthy because digestion directly affects how glucose enters your bloodstream. Foods that are rapidly digested can actually cause spikes in blood glucose, meaning that there are too many cars and not enough car parking spaces, and that can lead to something called insulin resistance. So if you're dealing with insulin resistance, it means your body cells aren't responding as effectively to insulin, the hormone responsible for regulating your blood glucose levels. So as a gentle reminder, insulin is our taxi. It picks up glucose and it takes it from the blood into your cells. However, if we have too many glucose molecules that have entered our bloodstream, we have that initial spike in blood glucose, then the car park closes its doors, it tells glucose it needs to go somewhere else. It cannot just disappear like a magic trick, abracadabra. Those taxis do not have enough spaces to pick up glucose, therefore they are less effective. Glucose is now stored as glycogen in the liver and the muscle, or as subcutaneous or visceral fat. So as a result, your pancreas now needs to work harder to produce more insulin to keep your blood sugar in check. However, this can lead to elevated glucose levels chronically and lead to type 2 diabetes. Now, there are lifestyle factors like obesity, lack of exercise, poor diet, which often contribute towards insulin resistance, and that is the primary reason you have low energy, because glucose is stagnating in the blood. We need to be able to signal it from the blood into your cells. And as much as this module is focused on nutrition, that is only one ingredient to your magic potion. We do need to look at mindset, and we also do need to look at exercise. Now, to tackle this, we want to adopt a balanced diet to keep a close eye on our blood glucose levels and our energy throughout the day. So we move on to starches and sugars. They are two essential types of carbohydrate that play crucial roles in the diet. Starch is a complex carbohydrate, namely a polysaccharide composed of glucose molecules linked in long chains. Think of it as a pearl necklace. It serves as a primary energy storage form in plants, and it's found abundantly in foods like grains, legumes, and even tuberose. Now, during digestion, starch is broken down into individual glucose units, which we would call monomers, providing a steady release of energy. On the other hand, we also have sugars, or simple carbohydrates, which include monosaccharides like glucose, fructose, galactose, as well as disaccharides such as sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Now, these sugars are naturally present in fruits, vegetables, and dairy products, as well as other processed foods for sweetness. For example, a bottle of orange juice. While starches contribute towards sustained energy release, sugars offer that quick source of energy, which is why you tend to see marathon runners have that sugary boost or that glucose gel, that simple monosaccharide. Balance the intake of carbohydrates is going to be essential for maintaining a healthy diet and your overall well-being. When we actually differentiate between sugary foods, whether they're natural or added, natural, they're rich in vitamins and minerals, and they do form part of a healthy, balanced diet. So that could be any fruit which contains fructose. Then we've got added sugar. These are naked to the human eye. They are considered empty calories. They contain energy, but they're low on vitamins, which is why it's really important if you do buy a fruit beverage, orange juice, make sure it says 100% from concentrate, because then we know that that organic fruit has been broken down and processed efficiently compared to just pumping it with loads of sugar, which in turn is going to spike your blood glucose levels. So to look at the difference in structure between starch and simple sugars, they're both carbohydrates, but they do have different structures and different functions. And this is how they're broken down. Starch is a polysaccharide. It's composed of many glucose units, which we're going to refer to as our pearl necklace. Its main storage is in plants, but it's also found in foods like potatoes, rice, and wheat. Now, starch can either be amylose, which is linear chains of glucose, or amyloleptin, which is branch chains of glucose. But without going into too much of the biology behind that or the chemistry, taking a look at simple sugars, they're monosaccharides. They're single sugar units. We can actually see here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 within this starch molecule. And then for the sugar, we've only got one, which is glucose. But again, it's not only glucose, it's sucrose, it's lactose for disaccharides, and maltose as well. Sugars are naturally present in fruits, honey, and dairy products, and they also are added to many processed foods and beverages. So in terms of digestion and metabolism, starch actually needs to be broken down into glucose, so we go from left to right, by digestive enzymes before it's absorbed into the bloodstream. So we are effectively breaking down these units. And yes, it takes a little bit longer, but that's why we then drip feed glucose into the blood rather than just consuming simple sugars which spike our blood glucose levels. And this is where we talk about topics such as glycemic index in later trainings. Sugars, especially monosaccharides like glucose and fructose, are absorbed directly into the bloodstream for quick energy, whereas starch or polysaccharides, they take a little bit longer. So both starch and sugars provide energy for the body, but their absorption rates and effects on blood sugar levels can differ based on their structure and composition. So my question to you is this: which one will have the biggest impact on blood glucose? Is it 66 grams of garlic bread or 145 grams of pasta? The answer is 145 grams of pasta, and the take-home message is the quantity of carbohydrate consumed in one meal directly affects your overall blood glucose levels. The quantity of carbohydrate that you consume plays a pivotal role in determining your overall blood glucose levels, because again, carbohydrates, they're broken down into sugars during digestion, and it leads to an increase in blood glucose. Therefore, the more carbohydrate that you consume, the greater influx of glucose into the bloodstream. Now, this is particularly crucial for people that do have diabetes, whereas if you are looking at maintaining energy throughout a calorie deficit, smaller portions more frequently are going to be favorable. So instead of having 2 to 3 big meals every single day, we actually want to break that down into 4 to 6 smaller meals to monitor your blood glucose levels, to stabilize it, but also to ensure that we are in a calorie deficit as well. Foods with a high glycemic index, such as refined sugars and processed grains, they're going to cause a rapid spike in glucose, which is going to pose challenges for glucose management. So that's not to say that you need to eat strictly. I'd recommend an 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time you are eating nutritious, whole grain, higher fiber foods, smaller portions more frequently, and then 20% of the time you can enjoy things like garlic bread or your favorite snacks. And it comes on to the final part of today's training, which is your unique magic potion. You get to control the ingredients that go into your unique magic potion, and when you take a sip, it should dramatically change your life. Whereas if you take a sip and it tastes like poison, or perhaps there's a missing ingredient, then we need to go back to the drawing board. So in terms of nutrition, we are looking at quality over quantity for food and drink, especially if you are looking to lose weight or even build muscle. It helps us to manage our blood glucose levels. It helps us to maintain or achieve a healthy weight and waist circumference. And it's also going to help increase insulin sensitivity when we're eating quality high fiber foods. Physical activity, which we'll learn more about in Move More, that's going to help to decrease your blood glucose levels. It's also going to increase insulin sensitivity as well, and it's also to help you maintain a healthier lifestyle to reduce the risk of any long-term health complications. And then in terms of mental health, we can look at mindfulness, visualization, slowing down relaxation exercises in taking charge, which in turn, again, is going to decrease your blood glucose levels, increase insulin sensitivity, and maintain a healthier weight and waist circumference.